Greetings and welcome back. We have now concluded our demonstration of set-driven key and all of the fantacular things we can do with it. So now what we're going to do is create our sparkler effect. Now this process is going to require we do a little bit of very simple modeling, a little bit of material work, and then we're going to have to rig that material using the techniques we've been exploring over the last 45 minutes or so. Then, once that's finished, we're going to add a particle system, which will actually be fairly simple. Put a material on that particle system, and we're done. So, this will be really quick and easy. I will not be doing a lot of ready checks for the initial parts of it, because really it's just some modeling, then some material work, and stuff that I think up to this point you will have seen at least once or twice. So, let's go ahead and get started. To begin, I want you to go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and make a cylinder. Now, height is what you kind of need to be focusing on. I want to make this so that it's just, I don't know, around twice as tall as the cake. But you can make up the height. If it's a little off, it's really not that big of a deal. Now, once you've got this in place, the first thing you need to do is name it. I'm going to call this Geo, for geometry, Sparkler Body. Under its input node, I'm going to bring the radius really low. So maybe something like, I don't know, let's try 0.05. Even that's a little bit excessive. Maybe a little less than that. Let's try 0.04. That'll probably do. Subdivision's axis, that does not need to be 20. 6 will do just as well for something this small. Now, a sparkler gets thicker as you get up to the top, because like the top of it has really been dipped in an explosive material that hisses and fizzles and shoots out all those sparks. So we need to model that in. The way I'm going to do that is hold down Shift and right mouse, and we'll grab the Insert Edge Loop tool, and I'm just going to put in an edge loop about a third of the way up the body. So now, we'll jump over to faces. I'll grab all of the faces in the upper half. It's a little easier to see which ones they are if I go into wireframe, just so you can see these faces. Shift right mouse and extrude these faces. You want to pull these out using the blue handle, of course for local Z. And you're just adding a little bit of thickness, like so. We're almost finished with the modeling process. Jump over to Edges. And then if I grab this edge here, and I'll just go ahead and shade up, make this a little easier to see. If I pull this edge up, we get a little bit of rounding suggested there, which is just kind of a nice little touch. And then we can go all the way to the top. And I'll do the same thing, but this time I'll do it with vertices. So if we grab all of these vertices, and then the one in the middle, and pull those up a little bit, and then maybe just grab the one in the middle and pull that up a little bit, we get some nice rounding at the top as well. That's really it for the modeling, so we have a couple more things to do. Let's delete out our history. So just go to Edit, Delete by Type History. And I want to hide the cake and move this to 0 in X and 0 in Z. I'll go ahead and leave it where it is in Y for the time being. I just kind of want to center it up in the world. So let's do a really quick ready check for people to get to this point. Okay, so you've got your sparkler geometry modeled, and now we need to make a material for it. I'm going to jump to Panels, Save Layouts, and we should have one of here for the persp and the hyper shade. At least I feel like we should. It wants to throw in the node editor and stuff. Alright, if it's there, I don't see it. So let's just do this. Window, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. And I'll just make the most of my screen space. Okay, now our material here, and I need to make sure that I'm not just using my default material, because if I do, that'll be really confusing. I'm going to make a Lambert material. So let's just bring out a Lambert and immediately name it. We'll call this Matte _ Sparkler Body. We'll get this applied to the sparkler geometry. Now this material excuse me, is going to be a little bit fancy. And here's how. I want you to assign a ramp to it, just like we did before. So bring in a ramp. You may delete the Place 2D texture node for this ramp. Assign this to color. And if you hit 6, you should see something kind of like this. You are welcome to grab your ramp and start playing with its flags to kind of tighten it up. So you'll notice, like in this case, I have red, and then blue, and then green. That's what you want to see right there. Now we're going to get a little bit fancy. I'm going to pull everything really tightly together. So I have a tiny little thin band of green, and then a lot of blue, and a lot of red. Let's rename our ramp node. We're going to call this Sparkler Ramp. Actually, let's be a little more concise. Well, let's stick with our naming convention anyway. We'll do text underscore Sparkler Ramp. So we know it's a texture. Next, we're going to bring in a noise texture. And before we do anything with this noise other than name it, we'll call this text underscore light gray. I'll give everybody a quick moment to catch up. And for those of you who missed it, because I think I just inverted my ready check buttons, which I need to make sure that I'm handling my pausing nicely. Let me just, if those of you who are catching up, go ahead and catch up. I'm going to jump backwards for just a moment and show everybody what we did here over the last couple of steps. What we did is we took our noise node. Make sure you have your ramp selected, and check this out. This lowermost flag, the red one, with that selected, you can take your noise node and middle mouse drag that onto selected color, and now we are plugging that color into the location of red. We don't even see red anymore. We just see the result of that noise texture. Now, some interesting things about the noise texture itself. We took amplitude and set that to 0.5. Then we took our color gain and color offset and just pulled those down to the same shade of gray to give us a nice palish color gray. The last thing we need to do is update the repeat U and V for this texture so we can see all the splotchiness. Now if you want to visualize that in the viewport, make sure you're switched over to high quality rendering. We'll take U and set that to about 3, and V we're going to set way up to about 50, and you'll see that now we can see some of that splotchiness, which is really nice. Now our next step is to create the dark version of this, what you get basically when the sparkler is burnt up. And there's a really cool trick to doing this. Select your noise texture, and here in the Hypershade, go to Edit, Duplicate, and choose With Connections to Network. And it makes a second copy of the node connected back to the original Place 2D texture node. Because this Place 2D texture node can drive as many textures as you want it to. So we'll just use the data all over again. This time, though, take your color gain and pull it to 2 darker shades of gray so you get a darker result. When you're finished, go back to your noise, select your blue flag or whatever flag you have on top, then middle mouse drag this texture onto selected color. And I'll bet you can already figure out what we want to do with the middle band here. We're going to change this from green over to orange. Now that's pretty much it. The last thing we're going to do, and this is really just for vanity's sake, is take either one of your textures. I prefer the light one, but it doesn't really matter. And we're going to middle mouse drag onto our material and choose bump map. Now that creates a really, really harsh bump map. So take your bump depth and pull it down very, very low. So I have mine at about 0.038. And it just gives you that sort of lumpy kind of bumpiness that you sort of expect when you play with a sparkler. Also, take a moment and you can play with your ramp flags a little bit, and you can tighten that up so you have a nice thin band of burning. And there's the rest of your sparkler. So now with that, let's do another ready check. I am muted. Thank you very much. I'm messing up all of my buttons today. That's terrible. All right, let me just go ahead and create another one of these. All right. So we're going to go to Create, Locator. And here is our locator. I'm going to call this Control _ Sparkler. And there we go. And that's really all that I've done. So we just have a new locator. Now notice that because I moved my sparkler geometry to 0 and 0 in X and Z, my locator is now dead center of my sparkler. That's good. That's exactly what I want right now. I want that locator to be right centered up, dead in the middle. Now we're going to do some fancy things that you guys haven't actually seen before up to this point. In your attribute editor, go to the transform node. You'll know it because it's just called Control Sparkler and you don't see the word shape appended to it. And expand limit information. Specifically, expand translate under limit information. I want you to take translimit X and activate min and max. We need to set min and max to 0. You can type that in manually, or you can click these little arrows to move the current value into the min and max slots. Now watch what happens when I try to move my locator in the x-axis. I can't. It's locked in place. Same thing with Z. Turn on translimit Z for min and max, and then transfer 0 to both those values. And now we cannot move in Z as well. If you need to snap the locator, if it's offset for some reason, if I were you, I would zoom in right up here to the very top of your sparkler, hold down the V key, and then middle mouse gesture right over that tiny little vertex there at the very tip top. And that should snap it right to the center. But if your sparkler is at 0, 0, 0, you should be able, or 0, 0, or 0 something 0. Basically, if you take a look at my values, it's translate Y is set to something, but X and Z are set to 0. If your sparkler is set to 0 and 0 as well, then they'll be lined back up. So that should actually be a non-event. So back to our sparkler and the attribute editor. Now, we're going to add some limits in the Y direction as well. Move your control to the bottom of the little enlarged area where the sparkler should be able to burn, and click on the min checkbox and transmit that value over. The upper limit is smaller than the lower limit. Well, that's okay right now. Notice I can't move my locator any lower than that point. Now, we're going to ignore that error for just a moment. Move your locator up toward the top. It doesn't have to be all the way to the very, very top. We'll just get it really close. And send that value over to max. That will make Maya quit yelling. And then check the max button. What you should have is a locator that is only going to move vertically and only between the top and bottom of the burnable part of your sparkler. Now here's the cool part. select your locator, select your sparkler, and hit P. Oh, I'll probably have to redo my my min and max again. I should have parented first, but that's okay. Let me kill my min and max. The reason is, as we saw in the previous lessons, or I think maybe 2 lessons ago, parenting is going to be relative to the location of the parent. So once I parented, everything kind of offset. So I'll just kill out the min and the max. I'll do the max first this time, and hopefully Maya won't yell at me. So I'll take my current value right here at the very top, send that over to max, and click the checkbox. Move to the bottom, send that over to min, and click the checkbox. And now I get exactly what I want. The neat thing about doing this is you can now take your sparkler and you can move it wherever you want to. You can even rotate it. And as long as you're trying to move your locator, it will only slide up and down the body and only in this area where your sparkler can burn. So let's give everybody a quick moment to get up to this point. I saw a question earlier. Somebody said the duplicated texture had what modifications? None, other than we named it to dark and we made it darker. So if we go to Window, Rendering Editors, and open up the Hypershade. So we took color gain and color offset to make a darker version, as you've been able to see already in the Hypershade from earlier, with or without sound. And to make sure that it was easier to differentiate if we weren't looking specifically at the colors themselves, we named it a slightly more obvious name, which is dark gray. All right. So with that all in place, I think we're ready to move on. Our next step is going to be to establish a set-driven key that will allow our locator to be moved up and down and will cause this material to update in tandem along with it, which at this point is very easy to do. All we need is the specific name of the attribute for when we adjust our ramp. So the way I would do that is I would just open up my attribute editor. Thank you, not my attribute editor. I would open up my script editor, open up the Hypershade, let's grab this ramp, and then just move any one of the flags. And I get text underscore sparkler ramp dot color entry list, some number, dot position. Now I have 3 color entry list entries. So it should be 0, 1, and 2. That's easy. And I'll need all 3 of them. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and assemble my command. We already know it from earlier. It's set driven keyframe dash current driver. Now, the name of our driving object, you might have forgotten it. That's totally cool if that happened. So just select it over here in the view. Control underscore sparkler. Control underscore sparkler. Now we need its attribute. That's translate Y. It's the up and down direction. So .ty. Next, we need the driven object and its attribute, which we've got right up here, since a whole bunch of stuff has moved, but there it is. Text, sparkler ramp, color entry list 0 dot position. I don't even want to type that, so I'll just paste it. And I can go ahead and put a terminator at the end, just to be nice. That's a semicolon. So there's our entire command. Set driven keyframe dash current driver control underscore sparkler dot ty text underscore sparkler ramp dot color entry list open bracket 0 close bracket dot position semicolon. Let's just grab that whole thing and hit Control C. And I'll just close out my script editor. Actually, let's do it in the script editor this time. What do you say? Let's press enter and enter and paste, and we'll change this to 1 and this to 2. We'll just do the whole thing in the script editor this time around. Now I'll show you guys a trick. If I was to press Control Enter in this window right now, all of this mel would disappear, and I'd have to type it all out again. If I have it selected like this at the time, Maya will execute whatever command I have highlighted, but it won't remove anything from this window. So if I select it all, I can execute it without it going anywhere. So my next step is pretty easy. all I need to do, really, is move my locator to a starting position. It can really be the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter, really. But I'll start at the bottom. Then I need to adjust my ramp accordingly, so it looks like we have burnt all the way to the bottom. This may take a little bit of trial and error to get the positioning just right, so be very patient. That's pretty close. You can punch in values if you get really close and you want to tweak it with your keyboard. I think we could probably go with this. Then we'll just pull black down, get black nice and snug. And there we go. We'll consider that all the way down there at the bottom. Now, once we have that in place, all we need to do is select all three of these commands and press Control-Enter. It just keyframed all three of them. How cool was that? Grab your locator, move it up to the top. In fact, you'll kind of feel maybe a little bit of sluggishness to it right now if you're following along with me, because it's actually reading all of that input. Now, we just update our ramp a second time. So grab your ramp, realign all of your flags for what this should look like if it hasn't burnt all the way down yet. Maybe right about there. Go back over to the script editor, make sure you have all your code highlighted, and once again, press Control-Enter. Now, let's give it a try. It is burning all the way down, but once again, we're getting that lag because of our curves. To solve that problem, just make sure you have your ramp node selected and open up the graph editor. There are our curves. Grab them, make them linear, everybody's done. You can now take your locator and move it up and down, and you have a little charred spot that will follow right along with your locator. Let's do another ready check for people to catch up. Okay, at this point, the hard stuff is actually finished. Now, I'm getting an error, says, somebody says they're getting an error. No object matches name set driven keyframe. Well, what exactly did you type? Paste exactly what you typed. In fact, copy paste it if you can over into BuzzNet right now. Let's take a look at what you typed. No, it's not a capital F. In fact, you'll know you get the command right because it will actually turn this nice color of cyan over in the script editor. I know what the problem is. Nope. It's probably not the ramp either. His capitalization could be just fine. Lotso, did you have that command called 3 separate times, one after the other? Yep. Florum's got it. It's your terminator. You've got to put a semicolon at the end of each command. That is what tells Maya that that command is finished. So what Maya actually saw on your end was something like this. It thinks you're trying to add on some other object. It's like, I don't know what that object is, and now I no longer have any idea what I'm supposed to do. So yeah, it kind of blows up at you. But put your terminator in place, and that tells Maya that you're finished with this command and ready to move on to the next command, and then everything is just fine. So that solved the problem. I figured it had to be something fairly simple. Okay, so with that done, we are ready to move on. Here's the cool part. The rest of this is actually very, very easy, and you could knock out, you could do everything else now inside of like 3 to 5 minutes if you really wanted to. Now we need to make a particle system. Here's how you're going to do it. Press F5, excuse me. Press F5 to go to the Dynamics menu set. Once there, I want you to go to the Particles menu and choose Create Emitter. This will make a particle emitter. We can see here. And you can move this around, you can place it wherever you want, and if you hit play, it will start firing off particles. Now these particles will be a little easier to see in wireframe mode, so for a little while I'm going to be working in wireframe. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a particles class. I could teach an entire 6-week course over just particles alone. I could teach a 12-week course. I could probably teach for an entire year about just particles and not run out of content and things to talk about. But we can still make you dangerous and still show you some really, really cool stuff. So what's a particle? It's really just a point in space that has coordinates and simulates in some way, meaning that there is a solver, which is like a little tiny algorithm that controls the behavior of this particle. Right now, it's a very simple system that just fires these particles out in a random direction, and they live forever, and they just keep on moving. They just spray out there into space. Now what we want, if we go back over to Photoshop, we've kind of already seen this, we want particles that are going to make these nice big long streaks that fly out into the distance. However, the problem we have is that these are just points, and they're not very convincing as streaks. Now I'll give you guys just a little bit of a tip. If you've ever watched high-speed photography of a sparkler, what flies off of a sparkler are just little tiny dots that are, super, super bright hot. But they're moving so quick that they burn your retina, and to us we perceive those as streaks of light. We're going to have to simulate that in order for things to work right. So here's what I want you to do. We have several different properties we need to change, and I want to give you sort of a tip. When you're creating your own particle systems, a lot of what you do will be trial and error. You'll know generally what it is you want to create, and then you'll make a change to something, and you'll test it, and you'll make another change, and you'll try to test it, and so on and so forth. That's kind of rule number one. They burn your retina. It's the part at the back of your eye that helps you perceive imagery and sends data to the brain. Now, that's kind of rule number one, that there's going to be a lot of trial and error. Rule number two, particles are historically dependent, meaning that as they move forward through time, as they calculate, they are reliant upon the frame prior to figure out what they should be doing right now. So right now, we're at frame 48. How does the system know where the particles should be at frame 48? Well, it says, well, what were the particles doing at frame 47? And we'll base it off of that. When we get to frame 49, Maya will go, hey, what were the particles doing at frame 48? And then we'll just go from there. And then what are they doing at frame 50? And it just continues moving on, just asking the frame before where the particles were. Why is that important to you? Well, if you have a really complicated scene, and if your timeline is set to a playback speed of real time, you may run into problems. Real time will drop frames in order to maintain the appropriate frame rate. That means that if you want to play back at 30 frames a second, but you have a complex scene, Maya will start dropping frames out, not calculating those frames, in order to give you a result that matches 30 frames a second as closely as it can. The part where this gets to be a problem is that if you have frames that are dropped, and Maya was relying on those frames for calculation, as it would with a particle system or with dynamic simulations, then suddenly that simulation will either be inaccurate or in highly complicated areas might cause Maya to crash. So you got to be aware of that. I have occasionally crashed Maya in this case, but it's not all that common. And it looks like somebody did just get a crash. Hey, everybody, hit Control S. Don't be like Engage. I said it first. So just keep in mind that you should not be using real time, because what will happen is your computer will go like, all right, we're at frame 48. What were we doing at frame 47? Maya will have to say, hey, we didn't calculate number 47. We couldn't. We were having to drop that frame. And so what will get handed over is the data from maybe, say, all the way back to frame 40. So you're basing the animation at frame 48 over what happened about 8 frames ago, and then everything starts to get unreliable. You resolve this by making sure your playback speed is set to either play every frame free or play every frame max real time. That third one's my favorite one, because for a long time they didn't have that, and I always kind of wish they did. So that will play back every single frame, but it won't go any faster than real time. And there you have it. Now, we have 3 different parts to this particle system in terms of the nodes that make it up. So let's talk really briefly about those. We have the emitter object. We have the particle shape node. And we have the particle transform node. Each of these objects have different jobs. The emitter's job is really all about putting particles into the scene, or as the name suggests, emission. The shape node controls the shape and behavior of particles. All kinds of other stuff too, but we're going to leave it kind of simple for now. And then the particle transform node controls the placement of the particle system as well as certain render features. So now back over here in Maya, we're going to start putting some settings into place. Now, just for sake of speed and efficiency. See ya, yappy. I'm going to be hooking you guys up with the numbers that I want you to use, but feel free to experiment. Also, if the numbers that I give you cause your computer to lag, to slug, to be slower than you like, please feel free to use lower values. So, let's do some naming of things. First off, this emitter we're going to call emit underscore sparkler underscore stage 1. We're going to take our particle node, which is a transform node, and we're going to name this part, which is short for particle, stage 1. That automatically names the shape node for us. So I want you to grab your emitter, and we're going to change some properties. Take rate and set this all the way up to 400. If you rewind and hit play, that just gives us a whole lot more particles. Please keep in mind, we do have to rewind and hit play. That's because of that historical dependency I was talking about earlier. If we want to see this result, we've got to rewind and view it from the beginning. Next, take your speed and crank this from 1 all the way up to 16. If you rewind and hit play, the particles are moving out much more quickly now. I had to pull way back to even be able to really see them anymore. So once again, that was take your rate and set it to 400. Speed set to 16. Let's do a really quick ready check for people to catch. Okay, so it looks like everybody's pretty much caught up at this point. So now let's move on. Now we're going to change some properties in the shape node of the particles. Right now, one of our problems is that these particles are living forever. And if we scroll down on the shape node, you'll notice early on we have the lifespan attributes, and lifespan mode is currently set to forever. You have to watch out for this kind of thing, because if you get too many particles in your scene, you can really start to bog things down, and by killing them off, you can keep performance nice and high. So we're going to take our lifespan mode and set it to random range. And I'll tentatively set this to 0.1 for lifespan and 0.05 for random. So what that means is we're going to live for 1/10 of a second, give or take 5/100th of a second. And there you go. Now I wouldn't mind that actually going a little bit farther out, so let me boost that. We'll take our lifespan, set it to 0.15, rewind and play, and see if that looks a little bigger. And it does, that's not too bad. Maybe all the way up to 0.18. There we go. I'm liking that a little better. So you can see a little bit of that trial and error taking place there. Now that's really all we need to do in this case. in terms of the shape node. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. We need to go to our transform node at this point. Close up your limit information. Yes, Kiwi, you need to be in wireframe mode. I mentioned that earlier on, that the particles will be a lot easier to see in wireframe mode, so just press 4 on your keyboard. Alright, so I want you to go to your transform node and expand mental ray, and this is where things are going to get a little weird for everyone. Turn off derive from Maya and turn on hide. What that means is these particles are not going to render. Earlier on, we had set up Mental Ray as our renderer of choice, and one of the great things about Mental Ray is that it can render hardware particles, such as points. It's very cool and very handy. But we are going to be hiding them. Here's what they look like natively. You can just barely make out these little gray spots. They're actually being motion blurred, so they're probably very difficult to see unless I zoom in. But we're not even going to be looking at them. Yeah, my voice will get weird when I render, so I'll try not to do it too terribly much. The point is, Mental Ray does render these. We do not want our stage 1 particles to render at all, so just click hide. That means that they will not render. That's it. Those are our only settings. So a really quick review of those settings for those who might have missed something. We took our rate and set it to 400 on the emitter. Also on the emitter, we set our speed to 16. In the shape node, we set our lifespan mode to random range with a lifespan of 0.18 and a lifespan random of 0.05. Finally, we went to our transform node. Under Mental Ray flags, turn off derive from Maya and turn on hide. So again, these particles won't even be visible at render time. The only reason we're going to create these particles at all is to allow us to create another set of particles that will give us our streaks. So let's do that now. Actually, before we do that, let's do a really quick ready check for everyone. Alright, so these guys are going to create our streaks. Now let's make the streaks. Select your particles. Now once again, I'm in wireframe, so these are nice and pretty and bright green. So hit play until you can see a few particles, and then just marquee select over 1 or 2 to select the particles themselves. Go back up to your particles menu and choose Emit from Object. Then rewind and hit play for just a second. What's now happening is that each one of these particles is leaving a tiny little trail of particles behind it. Basically, each particle is now its own little tiny emitter. Now we have some settings to change on this particle system as well. So you'll need to carefully select one of the particles of this new particle system, and we're going to name these. Let's call these part underscore stage 2. And then I'll take the emitter and I'll name that emit underscore stage 2. Actually, I think it was sparkler stage 2. And then particles underscore sparkler stage 2. Something like that. I can go back and correct it later. Now, we have some more properties to set up. Now, these are pretty straightforward. Under your emitter, I'm really going to crank the rate up. You may have to tone yours down if you want to. I'm going to set my rate to 900. But take speed and set that to 0, and immediately rewind and hit play and watch what you get. Now, of course, the next problem we have is that these streak particles are living forever. So jump over to your particle shape node, take lifespan mode, set it back to random range once again, with a lifespan of 0.075, and we'll give or take, I don't know, 0.02. Rewind and hit play. And maybe make those a little longer. Let's just try 0.095 or 90. There we go. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. There's just a couple of more things I want to do here. If you look up just one group from lifespan mode or lifespan attributes, you'll see under emission attributes there's inherit factor. This says how much of the speed of the emitter these particles are going to inherit. If you set this up to like 0.1 to 0.2, you'll get a nice sort of motion from those streaks, because those little particles that make them up are actually inheriting a little bit of their initial motion. It'll help a little bit come motion blur time to make things fade in and out a little more nicely. There's only one more thing I want to do, and that's make these particles kind of droop a little bit because of gravity. But we'll give everybody just a moment to catch up. So, just a quick review. All that I've done here. With our new emitter, we set rate to 900 and speed to 0. In the particle shape node, lifespan mode was set to random range with a lifespan of 0.09, lifespan random of 0.02. And then I set the inherit factor to about 0.2. So we're getting about 20% of the original speed of our stage 1 particles imparted to our new little streamers. How do you get a new emitter? All we did was we grabbed our initial particles, went to Particles, and chose Emit from Object. An emitter object is actually created by default. If you hit play, and if you look really closely, it can be a little tricky to see for sure, but emitter 2 is actually bouncing around inside this particle system. So if I rewind and hit play, you see it kind of jumping around inside there? That's because it's trying to find an average location between all of the points it's emitting from. So it'll sit there and kind of vibrate for a while. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our last part, which is we want to add a little bit of droop to these. Now, to make these droop, I'm going to apply gravity. To what particles should I apply gravity for a cookie? MMO Dust has it. The first stage. Easiest way I know to select those, I mean, unless you happen to have like your outliner or something open already, is select your streaks, hold down Shift, and then just marquee select over everybody, and you should end up with these particles, little tiny green points, and everything else should just be purple. That's how you know you have the right ones. Go to your Fields menu, and just choose Gravity. Your gravity field will pop up at the origin, so I'll pull it up here where it's a little easier to see. The location of this guy is completely irrelevant. You can put it anywhere. But crank its magnitude up to about 20 to 25. Hit rewind and play. And now you can see we have just a little bit of faint droop, which makes this look far more realistic than it did before. That's something you can't really get to look very nice with streaks, because right now I can pause, and as we rotate around, you'll notice a lot of these streaks have just the softest amount of curvature to them, pulling them down. But actual streaks in Maya are always perfectly straight, and the subtlety of this does make a difference. It does make the sparks look lighter, but feel kind of like they're more affected by gravity. Okay. So let's give one more little ready check for this. And then we'll be ready to move on. And we will create our little material for our particles, and we'll be finished. Please repeat how you create gravity illusion. Not a problem. Make sure that you have, and it's easier to do in wireframe, make sure you have your stage 1 particles selected. So in wireframe, you should see these little green points with little purple streaks hanging off of them. And I'll delete my existing gravity because it's no big deal to do this again. Go to your Fields menu and choose Gravity. Your gravity will be created at the origin. I like putting mine up where I can get to it, so I don't have to dig too far. So I'll just move it up here. But wherever it's placed is totally irrelevant. You just need to be able to get to it. Take your magnitude and crank it way up to 20. Hit rewind and play, and you'll get just that little bit of soft pull. Now, if you push that really far, let me show you guys something. This is just for kicks, right? This is just if you need something kind of fun to do. If you go under your solvers menu, you can choose interactive playback, and then start playing with gravity. In fact, let me give myself like 1,000 frames to play with, and hit rewind, and go to solvers, interactive playback. And now I can just I can pull gravity all the way up to 100, and you can see how that's really pulling those down. Or pull gravity down, and I can just basically slide that around to whatever I like. I can go negative with gravity. But it's a nice way to kind of test things out and see what stage you like stuff at. When you're done, rewind, set your frames back to where they were, and you're ready to continue. So it's kind of a nice diagnostic. Okay, it looks like pretty much everybody is ready to go. We now need to create our material. This is so simple. You should all be able to knock this out almost without me telling you about it, but we are going to create a new type of material. So let's all open up our hypershades, which in my case is still set over to our little sparkler. I'm just going to hold down the right mouse button, go to Graph, and choose Clear Graph. Now, at the very top of my list, I'm going to make a new surface shader. You'll see it listed right there. It looks like it's all black. A surface shader is a special type of material that pays no attention whatsoever to lighting. It's perfect for things like LEDs, or in this case, sparks. Go ahead and give this a name. We'll call it matte_sparks. Now, take your out color and make it a very pale yellow. I'll put a little more orange in it, actually, so maybe a really pale orange. Then take your out glow color. You can use the same color if you want to, though I might warm it up and put just a little bit more orange in it, but make a very dark version of it by taking your value slider and pulling it down. Notice how I'm going almost to black. So, out color is a very pale yellow orange. Out glow color is the same color, but pushed almost to black. Now, select your streak particles, and then just apply this material. I would just hold the right mouse button here and choose Assign Material to Selection. And let's do a quick render. And there you go. You have a little sparkler. Now, here's the cool part. If you hit rewind, you can take your initial emitter, you can snap it. You guys remember how to snap? Hold down the V key. So V snap right here to the locator. Then hold down Shift and select your locator, and P. So basically you're just parenting your emitter to the locator. So now, watch this. We can just hit play, and I can move my locator around and thereby animate this. If you want to, you can do that interactive playback trick again. Well, let's do 1,000 frames. Rewind, and go to solvers, interactive playback, and now we can just see what happens when I move this around. Or I could shade things up, and look, everything is trying to play back. The shader's working, the sparkles are working, and there it goes crazy. So that's everything, all working. There is one last tiny little insignificant step, and I'm going to show it to you using this real quick. Let me open up FCheck, and I'll show you an animation test that I did of this system. Here we go. Now, this was rendered at 2 different sizes, so it gives an error at one point. But here's my sparkler set. Notice something. At the very beginning of the animation, we see nothing. But then our sparkler starts working, and starts doing its thing. That's going to look a little weird if you don't have any source lighting that and it suddenly just springs to life. So if you don't want that to happen, you can solve the problem like so. Rewind and hit play. Then grab both of your particle systems. So you should see your streaks and your little tiny tip particles selected as well. Listen very carefully. Go to Solvers, Initial State, Set for Selected. Again, that's Solvers, Initial State, Set for Selected. Now, when you rewind, as long as that took, did that even take? There you go. Now when you rewind, that is how the particles are at the very beginning. There's only a little bit of a catch to that. You kind of need to have your locator in position first. So if you've already messed that up, you can go to Solvers. Let's see, there is it delete by type, initial state? Make sure I'm not crazy here. Remember how to kill that initial state. Why am I losing my mind all of a sudden? Well, I could always just hit rewind, hit undo. I'll figure that out here in just a second. Because off the top of my head, I suddenly my mind totally went blank. I've been talking for way too long. But if you animate your locator to where you want it to be, and then go to, or you could just set a brand new initial state. So that would be another nice trick to do. Just put your locator where you want it, play forward for a second, grab your particles once again, and this time just go to Solvers, Initial State, Set for Selected again, and now this is where they're going to start from. So there's a nice way to solve the issue. But that way, your sparkles do not ignite at the very beginning of your animation. That's it, folks. You have now created a sparkler. So there's a lot of things. We talked about set-driven key. We talked about using meld to create set-driven key. We talked about rigging up a material with set-driven key. Then we took a look at creating a particle system, and then creating a second particle system being driven by the first. We applied fields to this particle system, then applied a nice glowing material to it. But now we are finished. Your homework for this week is to build this. I need to be able to see that you got the sparkler rigged up, and that I can move that locator up and down and see your material update. And I need to be able to see your sparks as well. You'll just submit the MB file on how to do that. But that is it, and that is all, ladies and jelly spoons. Are there any final questions? Next week's topic is going to be lighting and rendering. All right, so I'm not seeing any new questions. That is going to wrap everything up for this video. Thank you all very much, and I will catch you all next week. Good night, all.